le temps de l'information. Mesdames, Messieurs, bienvenue sur For You Télévision. Et bien, pour cette première partie du bulletin d'information, c'est en langue anglaise avec vous, Dix Nabisse. Good day to you.
Bon après-midi, good day, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you immensely for joining us on this news bulletin. We kick off in Kenya, where the newly elected President William Ruto has been sworn in finally during an electrifying ceremony. It is therefore time for action after promises made during his campaign days. Take a wanna with the challenges that are with the new president.
Tens of thousands of Kenyans and at least 20 heads of state gathered at the Mao International Sports Center in Nairobi to witness the ceremony. Many people tried to force their way into the stadium, and Kenya's Red Cross communication manager, Peter Abwao, said first responders treated about 40 people with minor injuries as a result of the stampede. Ruto takes the reins of power from outgoing President Uhuru Kenyatta, his former boss, at a challenging time in an election marked by low voter turnout, a split of election commission, and allegations of fraud accused by the race loser Odinga. Despite supporting Odinga, Kenyatta welcomed the incoming president with a tour of State House. He urged Ruto to work with all Kenyans without favoritism. President Ruto faces the daunting task of lowering a high cost of living and managing a massive debt after several years of borrowing. Ruto's campaign had portrayed him as a hustler with a humble background of going through school barefoot and selling chickens by the roadside, a counterpoint to the political dynasty represented by Kenyatta and Odinga. But Ruto received powerful political mentoring as a young man from former President Daniel Arap Moi, who oversaw a one-party state for years before Kenyans successfully pushed for multi-party elections. However, Ruto now speaks of democracy and has vowed there will be no retaliation against dissenting voices. The election fever is now over, an inauguration ceremony successful. Kenyans are watching impatiently to see the managerial tactics and promises made by Ruto during his campaign days to help revive the economy in Kenya, reduce external borrowing, and deal with corruption issues, which has for over the years been a thorn on the flesh in the Republic of Kenya.
Let's now take you to Angola, where doubts persist whether Angolan opposition will take office. The international community has praised Angola for the general elections and President João Lourenço for his re-election after the Constitutional Court validated the result on August 24th. For many, the fact that countries such as Spain and the United States of America recognize the elections in Angola increases the credibility of the electoral process. The recognition of the international community came only to give the argument of the representatives who were in Angola and watched in person and from eye to eye what happened in the polling stations, said Angolan's pedagogic expert Alexander Coaster. From Angola, we take you to East Africa, where Uganda has paid a first installment of $65 million to the Democratic Republic of Congo in reparations for the looting and invasion carried out by the Ugandan People's Defense Forces, the UPDF, during the Congo War between the late 1990s and 2003. Details with you, Mwanzi Joyogo.
Uganda has paid the Democratic Republic of Congo $65 million in reparations for the invasion and looting by Uganda's People's Defense Forces UPDF during the Congo War between the late 1900s and 2003. This conflict involved up to 9 African countries, including Uganda and Rwanda, which supported rebel groups in the mineral-rich nation. On Monday, Uganda's Finance Ministry spokesman Apollo Mungida confirmed the news, which had been announced by DRC's Minister of Justice during a cabinet meeting on September 9th. The money is to be paid in 5 installments of $65 million starting this September and every September for the following 4 years. Kinshasa had initially demanded $11 billion, but the International Court of Justice ordered Uganda to pay $325 million. UN's highest court ruled in February this year that Uganda should equally pay its neighbor Rwanda $225 million for loss of life, $400 million for damage to property, and $60 million for damage to natural resources.
Let's now talk modern slavery on the African continent, where the percentage of those crises, such as forced labor and forced marriages, has soared about a fifth in recent years, as state reports by the United Nations have stated. The United Nations says it aims at eradicating all forms of this crisis by the year 2030, but its greatest dismay, the number of people caught up in this keeps increasing by the day. The details are with our student journalist, Wane Ipole.
According to the United Nations International Labour Organization (ILO), the number of people trapped in forced labor or forced marriage and other crises has swelled by a fifth in recent years to about 50 million. A study by the UN Agencies for Labour and Migration along with the World Free Foundation found that at the end of last year, more than half of those had been forced to work against their will and the rest forced into marriage, the ILO said on Monday.
Talking about is work that puts their future in jeopardy, whether because their health is on the line, they're working in mines, for example, where the imminent danger of a mine collapse, or they don't have the opportunity to get an education and learn those skills that would enable them to get a decent job and become productive workers when they're older.
This implies that nearly 1 out of every 150 people in the world are caught up in modern forms of slavery, the report illustrated. Both come under its definition of modern slavery, as they involve people who cannot refuse or cannot leave because of threats, violence, deception, abuse of power, or other forms of coercion, it added. Initially, the UN had set a goal to eradicate all forms of modern slavery by 2030, but the number of people caught up in forced labor or forced marriage ballooned by 10 million between 2016 and 2021, according to a fresh report. The situation had been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, which worsened conditions and swelled debt levels from many workers, as well as armed conflict and climate change, leaving people in extreme poverty and forcing more to migrate. To counter this and achieve the agency's goal by 2030, ILO Director General Guy Ryder called for improvements in recruitment practices and labor inspections.
To wrap up the first segment of this news, we take you out of the African continent to Kazakhstan, where Pope Francis was welcomed by Kazakhstan President Kassym-Jomart on Tuesday with the honor of a guard ceremony at the presidential palace in the capital, New Sultan. The Pope was forced to use a wheelchair and cane because of a strained knee ligament. Is on the trip to the former Soviet nation. On Wednesday and Thursday, he would participate in interfaith meetings with more than 100 delegations of Muslims, Christians, Jewish, Buddhist, Shinto and other faith groups from over 50 countries. Pope Francis had hoped his trip to Kazakhstan this week would offer a chance to meet with the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, who was justified or who has justified the war in Ukraine and of course pleaded for peace. That will be it for the first segment of this news. Of course, the second segment is in the French language with you, Bala. Bon après-midi, une fois de plus.
Good day to you, Jix Nabissé. Bien pour cette seconde partie en langue française, radons-nous tout d'abord du côté de l'Afrique centrale, plus précisément au Cameroun. 1958 et 2022, cela fait exactement 64 ans que le podol Ruben Omniobe a été assassiné. Eh bien, c'était dans la forêt de la Sanaga maritime, dans le sud du Cameroun, qu'une patrouille française l'a battu comme un animal sauvage, alors même que ce dernier défendait son pays. Eh bien, son corps fut traîné jusqu'au chef-lieu de la région où il fut exhibé, défiguré et tué par la suite dans la même région. Une cruauté que les nouvelles générations ignorent et même que les plus vieilles essayent d'oublier. Alors faisons un pan dans l'histoire du Cameroun dans ce reportage que signe Madone.
Il suscite jusqu'au
Eh bien, petit souci avec cet élément, nous y reviendrons peut-être. Mais cependant, allons du côté du Kenya, où William Ruto, les mains sur la Bible et sur la Constitution, a prêté serment devant le peuple fiévreux de joie le 13 septembre 2022 au stade Kasarani de Nairobi, après une présidentielle agitée et bravé finalement. Il accède donc au fauteuil présidentiel, mais de vives challenges l'y attendent encore. Toujours vous, madame, pour plus de détails.
Le vainqueur du scrutin du
Eh bien, allons du côté de la République centrafricaine. Créé donc par décret présidentiel du président Faustin-Archange Touadéra le 29 août 2022, le comité de rédaction de la nouvelle constitution connaît désormais sa composition. Nommé le 12 septembre dernier, les 55 personnalités chargées de rédiger la nouvelle constitution dans les 3 prochains mois seront donc installées le mercredi 14 septembre 2022. La cérémonie d'installation sera présidée par le professeur Faustin-Archange Touadéra, président de la République, et se tiendra à l'hémicycle de l'Assemblée nationale. Eh bien, mesdames, messieurs, rendons-nous à présent du côté du Sénégal et parlons Parlement justement. Le président sénégalais Macky Sall a réussi à faire élire son candidat à la présidence de l'Assemblée nationale. C'était le lundi 12 septembre 2022, alors justement d'une séance chaotique achevée sous la garde des gendarmes. L'installation du nouveau Parlement issu des législatives de juillet a donné lieu à une série d'incidents. Un député a ainsi arraché le micro à un autre et certains en sont même venus aux mains pendant les investives qui fusaient. Alors Nguyen nous reprend dans ses actions dans ce reportage.
Deux points de blocage.
Et puis nous allons du côté du Libéria. Démission de 3 responsables libériens accusés de corruption aux États-Unis d'Amérique. Et justement, 3 présumés aux responsables accusés donc de corruption et de détournement par l'administration américaine ont démissionné de leur poste. La démission a été validée le lundi 12 septembre 2022 par le président George Weah. Eh bien, Faute revient ici pour plus de détails. Soudan, où à présent des milliers de Soudanais ont donc défilé le mardi dernier dans les rues de Khartoum pour réclamer une nouvelle fois le départ des militaires qui dirigent le pays depuis le putsch d'octobre 2021 et bien sûr la remise au pouvoir aux civils. Et bien ces derniers manifestent chaque semaine depuis le coup d'état du général Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, malgré une répression qui a fait 116 morts et même des milliers de blessés. Eh bien, en terminant donc avec cette actualité du côté du Niger. Eh bien, du côté du Niger, la Banque mondiale a donc lancé le mardi 13 septembre 2022 à Miami un important programme d'électrification visant donc à porter le taux national d'accès à l'électricité à 30% en 2026 et à 80% d'ici 2035 contre 17,5% aujourd'hui. Donc, coût de 317,5 millions de dollars. Ce programme ambitionne d'accélérer l'accès à l'électricité pour les ménages urbains et même ruraux, les établissements de santé, d'éducation et les entreprises. Et tout ceci, c'est bien sûr selon le ministre Ibrahim Yakubu. Eh bien, mesdames, messieurs, voilà qui met un terme à cette édition d'information sur For You Télévision. Je suis Bala pour la version française.
And for the English version, I have been Jix and Nabise. Ladies and gentlemen, do have a blessed day in company of our programs.